I'm not, or I am now. Okay, good. All right, great. All right, recording. Good. So if you come over to this repo, this Open States Scrapers repo, and you click the green code button that you usually click if you wanted to check something out from GitHub, you can click onto this code spaces tab here. And you should have the option, if you're logged into GitHub, to start a new, I guess I've already started one, but you should see a big green link here that says start a new code space. If anyone's following along and doesn't see that link, just let me know, raise your hand. Does anyone have that? Actually, you can go the other way. What's that? Yes, you have to be signed into GitHub. Yep. So if you click that, it should open up a code space in your browser. You can also do this in VS Code. Nope, Jesse. This is it's reached the spending limit for this period. Have you tried these out? All right. So if you're all right, does anyone have this open? Is anyone getting some? Yeah, let's take a look and make sure. Okay. All right. So what's going to happen when you click that? If you click that code spaces link, it's going to set up an environment for you. And this is going to be there's going to be a little black window that pops up, and there's going to be some text as it starts installing some dependencies. This shouldn't take longer than 5 to 10 minutes. And as soon as it does that, you're going to have your own kind of dedicated instance of a machine that you can do all of your work on. It's going to look just like VS Code if you're familiar with it, and you're going to be able to edit things in there. So once that runs and your code space is set up, you'll have all of the code checked out and all of its dependencies, and you should just be able to start running the commands that we'll talk about. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to let that run, because I know it takes a little while. But once that runs, we will come back into there and start actually running a scraper so that people can at least see how to run their first scraper. And I want to make sure everyone kind of has that baseline, because once you know how to run a scraper, then we can talk about how to edit them. But it's going to be really useful if you can run one first. And if people are in the Zoom and are having any issues with code spaces, just go ahead and post that in the chat too.
So James, which do we click on there? I've got code spaces. Your workspace is in the cloud.
Sorry, you wanted to in code space, you wanted to go. Yeah, hit that great code space. Okay. First email I got about all right. So if you've got a working code space, so who has a working code space? Like who's in an environment where they can see an editor and they can see checked out code? I'll pull people over here. Over here. All right. So if you're in there, then in the terminal inside of VS Code, you should be able to run the first command just to make sure that things are installed, because sometimes it seems like the code spaces are still installing some things. So just try running the command poetry, the word poetry, and then space, and then dash dash version. And if that command succeeds, then we know that your environment is set up. If that command doesn't succeed yet, then probably some things are running in the background. Anyone have that working already? Good. All right. How are people in the chat doing?
What was the poetry dash dash what?
Okay.
Version.
Okay, quick look. Yep, so a few people are still running the post create command. That will take up to 15 minutes, hopefully not quite 15, but so once that's running, let me post this link here. If you go to docs.openstates.org and then click writing a committee scraper in the sidebar, that's going to give you some background on what we're doing here. So the way that Open States works is when we write an Open States scraper, the initial pass of the scraper is going to hit the state's website, grab all of the data of the type that we're interested in. So within Open States, we have 4 different major scraper types. There are committee scrapers, bill scrapers, people scrapers, and event scrapers. And so each of those is a separate process. So we're only, when you're working on a scraper for Open States, you're just going to be working on, a given state and a type. And for the most part today, and Riley, correct me if I'm wrong here, committees is what we're going to be focused on. So we're going to be focusing on committees. So, we're at the beginning of a year, there's a lot of turnover on these state sites and things like that. So a lot of these scrapers need to be updated for the new committees, new sites that have come up. And so we're going to be talking about these committee scrapers. All the other scrapers work similarly, but there are subtle differences between each type. So if you're interested in one of the other ones, you're free to kind of explore that on your own, but we're going to mostly be focused on committees today. And this document up here is going to kind of, if you've never written a scraper before, this will give you some, and again, we'll be rotating around and kind of giving people some stuff, but I would take a look at this document and start reading through this writing a committee scraper thing. This is going to give you some very basics on just kind of like, how do we look through the actual source of the page? How do we find things, especially for those of you that haven't written a scraper before, haven't written a scraper in a while. A lot of this work actually happens in the browser. So you're going to be really inspecting the page. The first thing you're going to really do is kind of try to get familiar with the committee page that you're interested in. On the GitHub, if you go to github.com/openstates/issues, you will see a list of issues here that I pulled up a little bigger. These are all the committee scrapers that the team is currently in need of. So if there's a state that you have an affinity for, and you see it on here, it might be a good idea to just go ahead and click on that issue and comment that it's one that you're interested in working on. Feel free to work in teams or however else you want to work. But it would just be good for everyone to know who's working on what committees, so we don't wind up with people on 2 sides of the room or someone on the chat working on the same committee as someone else. So if you want to claim one, go ahead and comment it. Comment on it now and just say that that's the one you're going to be looking at, and so other people can know that they can either collaborate with you or they can find a different state to work on. So those will be first come, first serve. These committee issues also kind of walk you through the terminology that we use when we talk about committees. For the most part, things are hopefully pretty familiar, but if there's anything that's unfamiliar about things, we use terms like upper and lower for chambers instead of House and Senate, just to be generic across the states, because every state has different terms for those things. So there's some things like that that might seem a little unfamiliar if you've never dealt with legislative data before. But I think these are all pretty well defined in these issues. And that also has a link to the doc too. So that's a good kind of starting point. People have an idea of which states they're interested in working on. You think I should run people through the spatula tutorial? I think that'd be good. All right. Yeah. All right. So if you've written a scraper before and you've used a tool like Beautiful Soup or something like that, you're probably at least, familiar with the basic concept of navigating a page. But the next step for those of you that have written any scrapers before would probably be to get familiar with the scraping framework that we're using. So the fundamental philosophy behind Open States scrapers is maybe a little different than you're used to if you've written other scrapers or software. So obviously these scrapers need to run for years. And so that can be kind of an engineering challenge because we know that the underlying pages are going to change frequently and things like that. So one of the things that one of the real kind of things that we tried to push our scraper in the direction of was having code that or a framework that kind of pushed you to write code as clean as possible for a scraper. We all know that scraper code, if you've written a scraper before, it can be very dirty. If you've never written a scraper before, I like to say that scrapers can't be cleaner than the site that they're scraping. So we're dealing with some pretty ugly websites with some pretty bad HTML and a lot of times other kind of inconsistencies on them. So your code's necessarily going to reflect that. So if you're, especially if you're a newer developer and you've been kind of had people hammering into you that code needs to be very clean, scrapers are often going to be an exception to that because we're dealing with, real world stuff and we don't have the luxury of kind of this pre-formatted data. So for that reason, we have this framework called Spatula. And what Spatula does is essentially it tries to get you to structure your code in a way that makes your code easy to test and easy to kind of run individual pieces of instead of just having one large scraping function that does everything and hits 25 different pages. You're going to design your scrapers in what we call a page-based design. So if there's one type of page on the site, I don't mean you don't need to write a different scraper for each URL on the site, but if you'll see different types of pages. So committees, you're typically going to have at least two different types of pages, the type of page that lists all the committees and then the individual committee pages themselves. And you might have additional pages too. Maybe there's a page for meetings for each committee. So you identify the different types of pages that you're scraping. And then from there, you're going to use Spatula to write kind of one class per page. And so I will walk through a little bit of what that looks like here. If you want to follow along with this, or if you want to do the full tutorial on your own, I'm not going to do the whole tutorial. I'm standing up here, but I'll kind of show the general outline of what it looks like. This is all at, which a better place to paste these links. Paste this into the chat here. If you search for Spatula and my name, James Turk, it should be the first link. So that's probably the easiest way to get there instead of typing in the full URL. If you go to this tutorial here with a first scraper, this walks you through scraping a single page of employees from a fictional site and kind of shows you what we're talking about when we talk about this page-based design. For the most part, this means we're going to write one or two functions per page that are just going to extract the exact data we want from that page. And then you're not going to be responsible for all of the logic of like actually fetching the HTML and things like that. These classes are going to be kind of coupled to the URLs that they're associated with. So you might write an employee detail page like the one that I have up here on the screen. In our case, that would probably be more like a committee detail page. And then that class is responsible just for getting those committee members out of the page. Riley, do you know of a committee scraper that's currently working in good shape? North Carolina. All right. So with it, if you want to take a look at a working one, if you go into the scrapers next directory in the code that you have checked out or running in your code space, and then go to North Carolina committees, you should see a working scraper. Let me see if I can, I don't know if code space is working up here. I'm going to have to do it differently. Oh, not North Carolina. Okay. So what we're talking about here is over here in the scrapers next directory, you'll see a directory for each state. And some of them will already have a committees.py in them. I think most should. And then when you look at this, what you'll see here is inside of, I think Arkansas might be all right. Inside of a committees.py, you'll see a handful of these classes that are like inherit from HTML page. And so this is what we're talking about when we talk about a spatula scraper, and we'll talk a little bit more about the format of this in a second. But if you take a look at one of these, this might be, I would read through and just kind of at least see how much of it makes sense, how much of it looks familiar to you. You know, the general concept of these is essentially that they are going to each have a source URL up here at the top. We'll talk about the selector bit in a little bit. Then they'll have some processing functions inside that actually pull the data from the page itself. And then they're going to return instances of the committee class. So here where they're going to create this scrape committee class. So essentially your code's job is to take the HTML, use whatever selectors you need, and then return instances of these scrape committee classes that have predefined fields. And so you'll see they have names, classifications, chambers, and parents, and then you can add members to them, which there will be examples of if you look through one of these. So since there's already about 50 of these already in the repo, these are usually a really good starting point, so you can kind of see how they're supposed to be structured, and then try to structure the one that you're working on in the same way. I'm seeing a lot of the committee scrapers that we have issues for in here. So I'm a little, what's the step?
We've got like half.
Okay.
Also, it's not showing your ID.
Oh, the sharing wasn't showing my ID. Sorry about that. I'll change it. Sorry about that, folks. All right. So now you should be able to see my ID. Is that better? Yeah. Good. So Arizona for sure works. All right, we're good. All right, so Arizona for sure works. So we'll take a look at Arizona first. So Arizona, oh, it's a nice simple one too. All right, good, great. All right, so Arizona is a nice simple one. So Arizona, we only have one type of page that we care about. It turns out all of Arizona's data can be collected from a single page, and that page has JSON on it. So we don't even have to do a lot of scraping. So sometimes we don't actually have to deal with a lot of HTML. And this is one of those nice cases where we don't have to, but a lot of the same things will still apply. So the general structure of one of these is all of the committees. So you'll create a class that represents the page that you're trying to scrape. So you'll pick the committee list page, for instance, you'll say, all right, the first thing that I need to do is just get a list of all the committees. So starting with the committee list page, like this one here, you would then just create a new class and put a source URL at the top here. And so that'll just be the page that you're looking at in your browser. And then from there, you're gonna define these process page and process item functions that are actually going to do all the extraction. So inside of here, since this is JSON, we're just extracting things from inside of a dictionary. So this one's pretty straightforward, but shows you how we're building up these scraped committee objects with names and chambers. So for each committee that you find on the page, you would just put its name and its chamber. And if it's a subcommittee or anything like that, you can also add these other fields like classification. Those are all documented in the issues themselves. So you can, if you're wondering what fields are available, those are all there. Then if there are members on that page as well, and you don't need to traverse to another page to get the members, you just go ahead and on that actual object, you're going to call this committee.addMember function. So really, we're just taking the page and we're just generating instances of these committee objects and adding members to them as we go. So we don't have to worry about how the data is being stored. All that's going to happen behind the scenes. So then when we want to run one of these, if you open your terminal, this might be a good starting point if you've never run a scraper at all before. You will run poetry, run spatula, scrape, and then the path to the scraper that you want to run. So in our case, scrapers, next, AZ, committees, and that will, why is this? Oh, right, I'm not in code space.
I think the code space isn't dependency.
It should.
But
You're not able to run poetry?
what's this like spatula?
Huh. It worked for you? Okay, 1 second. Still learning how these code spaces work. It seemed like they were going to save us from these troubles, but we might have to set up environments still. Can you run, are you able to run poetry in your code space?
Yeah.
Okay, try running poetry install. That should install the dependencies. I'm not sure why that code space didn't already have them, but if anyone else is having issues, if you can run poetry in the code space, running poetry install should run the dependencies or should install the dependencies like I'm doing here. Hopefully those were already set up for you, but it seems like maybe the code spaces are a little flaky. Once you've run poetry install, you should be able to run this poetry run spatula scrape command. And so again, whenever you want to run a scraper, it's poetry run spatula scrape and then the dotted path to the scraper. So we'll always start with scrapers _ next, and then usually a state name, and then in our case, committees. If you yeah. And so if you have multiple scrapers in the same file, you can also add the name of the class at the end here. So if I had multiple scrapers in the Arizona file and I wanted to run just committee list, I can also add committee list here. So this is just the same dotted path that you would use if you were importing it in Python. So that should do the same thing. And you'll see this one is a very short scraper. It only needs to grab one page. You can see the URLs that it fetches. So it prints out some debugging information as it runs, and then it will tell you that it wrote some number of objects to a directory. And then what you want to do after you've successfully run a scrape is open that directory and just take a look at the data that came out of it. Every time you run, it'll create a new directory so that you can kind of compare your results between runs. So this second part of the path will just increase. So the second time I ran it, it goes into 002. Open those in VS Code as well. And you'll see it just created a bunch of JSON files with ugly names. But if you open one up, you will see inside of it that there is hopefully the committee data that you were looking for. And so if you take a look at this, it looks like we have the members that were on this page and things like that. So essentially the process of kind of iterating on these is that as you work on your scraper, you'll continuously run them and then check the JSON output that's coming into here. Yeah. Yes, the JSON output does not have the state name. That is the way that these scrapers run the full pipeline. I'll give a little background on. So we have these write out JSON to disk when you're running them locally, and that's mostly for development and so that you can kind of quickly iterate on it and don't need a database set up. In production, what winds up happening is there's a second step to this process, which is that JSON gets imported to the database, and the state is known at that time because we know which state it was being run. Yeah, great question.
It looks like there's a couple people stuck in the waiting room.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Um,
Thanks.
oh.
Chat, are you running production on a Unix server? We have
No, we are not. Production runs in a custom built system. It starts up. If people want to know about this, production runs scheduled ECS jobs. And so everything runs on kind of ephemeral ECS servers. And that is all run via a very bespoke system that was designed when the project did not have any money, and is designed to be very, very cost efficient, but also not the easiest thing to show people how to run, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a similar concept to running them all on a cron, but it turns servers on and off and things like that behind the scenes. I think for now, probably what we'll do is maybe float around a little bit and just kind of try to answer questions in the room, because I think people are still getting things set up. If there's anything else that we want to kind of go over as a group, I'll definitely do that as I kind of see where people are at. But we will be around, but I'm going to drift around and just kind of check how people do. Yes. Yeah, all things on the screen. And then yeah, my parents live in the burbs. So I went to the last night and then here's how you later, the knowledge that makes the way out. We're using selectors that we can go out. Because the JS. So basically, I put it on the way. No. Kind of battle. No, it's but yeah.
It was, well, it's like, scary, the concepts are a little bit. Yeah, right, fetching and all that happens. Reason for that is that what we do is so when you're running local expansion, it's about when it's running on the server. Those pages. Yeah, from that. Actually, by having that level ahead of the structure. You have those hooks in place, for instance.
Hey, I apologize for being late.
It's getting past the issue, but made by and you're right about those things that are so you don't have to swallow it. So so in that case, you would ask while you're developing, you have to source on the command line and you try to small file again. And then so if you there's a decent throw like chain, it's typically 5 to 8 investors. So you have another this is basically typically you have directory page, almost all gets right from one call. You've got a page like here are all the committees, and now I need to so like the scraper for the directory is fast that we create for people. Same way that people have functional but doing so with this, you can write kind of like zero or I'm gonna learn how to figure this right there. And then you can go back to the down actually have this take place or you can and down the like this is on the same page if you're all set you can probably try like that like example but it's like so you'll create a community one page, one committee, and per page, and but when you return those committee objects, that all you need to do is committee object storage gets taken. So it's basically the request part of the scrape and the storage part of the scrape are taken care of. You're kind of right. Turn this HTML into it's mostly south from here. Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, there's a learning curve here, but I'm learning. So that's the hope. In the long term, when you have 250 scrapers, right? Yeah, have each one be slightly different. So I mean, there's this takes care of all that. And then the other thing that the objects are validated on the way out. So if there's no RC, obviously you can areas of the current stack. If you try to put something into the video file, it's not straight for like put your selector grab instead of being about second code now, all that it's like from here, it's the ones that I'll say I don't use on this website once that's yeah. So yeah, and all this it's pretty our boards here. CSS sliders. Leave at 7. And next week, it's like an hour. Comment. Say that you're gonna be working on something.
Also,
Like it's but just like Jersey might be interesting. It's very nice to be page 1 hour and find. Yeah, I mean, really obviously like the western edge of the it's fun. That's but yeah. It used to be like in on the gas, but it's then always before. Oh, yeah, it's like all everything. Age class, so yeah, crazy. All right, we'll be around. I don't know. Just reading through the. Just let me know. Thinking.
For the people in the room, some of them are deciding issues, so they can drop off. Yeah, I mean,
Oh, they got that issue figured out. Good.
That.
All right, so if people are kind of getting started on the Zoom and all that, feel free to drop off as you claim things. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the day and here to help. And if you're in the room, just flag us down and I think a lot of people are kind of taking their look at the tutorial and starting to get set up. So if you need anything, we will be around all day.